Well, hello. Hope you're enjoying your Memorial Day. The message we had this past weekend at Deep Rivers was really so important about biblical justice and social justice. I decided to do a recap and send it out. The symbolism of justice is a blindfolded lady holding scales, and she's blindfolded because justice is supposed to be about impartiality. The Bible has a ton to say about justice. It encourages us to act justly. I'll read a shortened version from Micah 6. He has shown you what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. This weekend we spent a ton of time talking about the history of biblical justice, how it was seen in the Old Testament, and when it didn't happen, it was the role of the prophets to step up and correct the situation. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fathers, plead the case of the widows, Isaiah 1:17. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless, and maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, Psalm 82. Jesus said to the Pharisees, woe to you, because you neglect justice, Luke 11:42. It's a theme throughout the New Testament that justice was supposed to be something that we were concerning ourselves with. We did a deep dive. We talked about the history of the church, how we have been there to provide justice for children, women, the issues of slavery, even the issues of medicine, prison reform, and taking care of the poor. We reflected quite a bit on the history of the church and how we've been a source and a force for justice. Then we talked about biblical justice. We did a little bit more of an explanation about that. Biblical justice reveals the heart of God. Think about that. Biblical justice reveals the heart of God. And injustice is whatever does not meet God's law. There's two words in the Old Testament, mishpat and tzedakah, that describe justice. Real quick, mishpat is to treat everyone equally, acquitting and punishing on the merits of the case, regardless of race, social status. The other definition, tzedakah, is about our day-to-day living and how we're supposed to conduct all our relationships with fairness, generosity, and equity. Now, being for biblical justice today does not mean being against justice in the social sense, if I could say that, because injustice is sin. But, that's important, I shouldn't glance over that. Injustice is sin. If it doesn't match up to God's law, it is sin. But biblical justice looks very different than today's social justice. I encourage everyone to check out Vadi Bakum. He's a very valuable voice in this. He's an African-American pastor who's speaking out quite a bit on this idea of social justice. And he lays out a very needed foundation. I'm going to go quick. If you are not going to have a biblical worldview, you're naturally going to drift by default to a materialistic, naturalistic worldview. Karl Marx did this. He said that life is a struggle of conflict for goods and resources. When that happens, you drift into the area called critical theory or conflict theory. If this is true, that the struggle of life is only for goods and services, then life quickly becomes divided into two groups, oppressors and oppressed, those who have and those who have not. Oppressors are seen as those who have rules because they want to keep things the way that they are, supposedly. But unfortunately, two institutions instituted by God have some rules, the church and the family. That's why BLM has had it on their website in the past. I think they took it off, that one of their goals was to dismantle the nuclear family because they see the church and the family as oppressors. With this lens, what happens when you see disparities? Automatically assume that the oppressed and the oppressors are playing it out, and you're not seen as individuals, but you're seen as groups. And then racism is seen as the norm. Racism is seen as everywhere, even without specific laws and policies to point to. With this kind of thinking, disparity equals oppression, disparity equals injustice. So if that's the case, then inequity equals injustice, and justice equals equity. Can you ask for any other reasons why there might be a disparity? You're not even allowed to ask in our current culture, in our current climate. Other options are not considered because today, unfortunately for many people, experience is knowledge. In fact, they'll go so far to say that knowledge is a social construct. If you say choices matter, then you're accused of blaming the victim. There is a suppression in the marketplace of ideas where reasonable discussion is not allowed. God is God of truth. Facts matter. I encourage you to find Vadi Bakkum's book called Fault Lines. Even if you only read chapter 3, he talks quite a bit about facts and statistics. Now, narratives are emotional and powerful, especially when there's a video involved, but we need to go back and look at the facts. We need to go back and look at the truth, because God is a God of justice. Truth matters. There is an effort to redefine our country. The 1619 Project is an attempt to redefine the U.S. as a racist country, as an attribute, not as a part of our history, not as a part of our past, and not as an issue that we still have to deal with today. They're trying to redefine and give it as an attribute or a characteristic to our country's core. So, if there is a disparity, and there's no getting around that, how do you fix the disparity? Now, Martin Luther King talked about the equality of opportunity. Everybody should be given the same opportunity to achieve. Everybody should be given the same respect, the same honor, the same rights. There's no doubt about that. But today, it's not about the equality of opportunity. It's about the equity of outcome. Why were 22 of the first 29 Apollo astronauts firstborn children in their family? It's because they had certain qualities and characteristics. They had attributes that set them apart and made them better astronauts, or more able to do that. Engineering tends to attract guys, men, because we're drawn to things. The nursing profession traditionally was more appealing to women because they're more concerned about relationships. Now, there are women engineers and there are male nurses, and that's great. If my daughters want to be an engineer, my son wants to be a nurse, that's great. But what happens when we demand a 50-50 split, when we demand equity in these things? There's two key words, motivation and abilities. We talked a little bit about this. We don't have time, but a society where there is all equity is a mess, because there's nobody. We're all the same. There's no. We don't bring anything different to the party. Here's the bottom line: people are smarter than me, and they work harder than me, and it's okay for them to be richer than me. They can have more things than me because they're either smarter than me, or they work harder than me, or they just have different abilities. They're taller than me. They're stronger than me. Inequity is not an evil, it is a necessity. It enables us to exchange goods and services. There is no equity in heaven. I know that sounds harsh. There is equality, yes, but our rewards differ. We talked about two parables of Jesus, the parable of talents. Jesus, in this parable, everybody was given a different amount, and they're supposed to be just responsible with what you have. And then there's the parable of vineyard workers. All are equally rewarded at the end, even though they did different work. Now, somebody who's in favor of equity could look at that and go, see? That's what I'm talking about. We should all be paid evenly, even if we do different amount of work. Jesus' point that the only equity in life is one of undeserved grace and forgiveness. Everyone has to choose. Is God an oppressor because he has a moral right and wrong? Or is God a redeemer because he makes equal access to God's grace available? The last point, what happens when equity of outcome does not occur? Traditionally, the state has then been responsible for this redistribution. Again, Vadi Bakkum says that social justice is redistributive justice. And the problem with that, it doesn't change hearts. This was not a message about taxes. This was not a message about money. It's a message about how biblical justice propels us to have transformed hearts. It changes our hearts. Social justice does not. In Job 29:11-17, we see Job is talking about the fact that before he had his trials, he was a highly esteemed person in his community because he was an advocate for and a facilitator of justice. But Job learned two things from his trials. He learned that Job is not the ultimate righteous one, that he needed God's righteousness, but he also realized that those he helped needed more than his help. They needed God more. Ultimately, we are to be a gospel-focused, gospel-centered people, not rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic by trying to make everybody's life easier. We are here to point people to Jesus and to make them aware of their sin. The only real solution is found in Ephesians 2:14-21. We don't have time, but the gospel is the only thing that's going to unify us as a people. Take care. God bless. Again, have a great Memorial Day weekend. Bye-bye.